Five, four, three, two, one. Coming to you
One.
live. It's Lichtman live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, great to have you on board.
Nice. That was a really good welcoming. You got too close here. Move back a little bit. You got too close to the screen. There you go. Okay. Move to your right a little bit. There you go. Perfect. Thank you, sir. Um, when we posted the video today, everybody went, "So no prediction today? No prediction today. Just be patient."
No prediction today. We're just waiting for the video. It should be, we're shooting for Thursday or Friday, no later than Sunday. So it's just a matter of days. If it's out Thursday, we'll give it to you on a regular show. Otherwise, we'll have a special show only for our audience whenever the prediction comes out.
There you
You will
go.
have a privileged seat.
Wow, a privileged seat.
Yes, and you don't even have to pay for it, but you can become a member and you can donate.
You're not wrong. He's drinking a LaCroix today, folks.
Pretty good, huh?
But you,
Really healthy.
but last week someone said that something was better than LaCroix. But we,
Yeah, some Trader Joe's thing. We'll have to
oh
try
right,
that.
Trader Joe's. Yeah, interesting.
So not only am I drinking LaCroix today, I
Yeah,
ran 6 miles
wow,
and did an hour gym workout.
that's pretty good.
I'm still alive.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, she should be.
Let's get into the main topic, the headline of our show. It seems that maybe peace is stalling in Gaza and Israel. A lot's happened in Gaza and Israel recently. It was discovered that some hostages were killed. There have been protests that have broken out across Israel. I think now 40,000 plus Palestinians have been killed in Israel. People thought that maybe after the hostages were killed, Netanyahu and the Israeli government were going to come to peace talks, but it seems like it's actually gotten worse. Reports are
Yes.
that Netanyahu is backed into his corner. Benny Gantz, the left wing leader in Israel, says that Netanyahu is stopping progress for Israelis and the peace. This is not good for the Biden Harris administration, right, Dad?
Not good for anyone in the world, and particularly not good for the Biden-Harris administration. Obviously, we don't have boots on the ground in Gaza, but the United States is very heavily invested in that war, which has become a humanitarian tragedy with no end in sight. 70 years ago, one of my favorite presidents, who was president 70 years ago, Sam, in the
Dw-
1950s?
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Whoa, you're getting good at these quizzes. Wow, that's right. And Dwight Eisenhower had seen war. He was one of the critical leaders of the U.S. military in World War II, responsible for the D-Day invasion that ultimately ended the war in Europe. And he said, things in the Middle East will never be resolved until the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians is resolved, and it cannot be resolved by military means. Netanyahu has not learned that lesson. He thinks he can protect Israel, destroy Hamas with this horrific, relentless war. I am a strong supporter of Israel. I firmly believe in Israel's right to self defense. And I also am highly critical of our other Arab nations who've used the Palestinians as a pawn to keep alive conflict with Israel instead of providing real aid to the Palestinians. Imagine if instead of buying 1,000 Rolls Royces and how many yachts, the Saudis, who per capita are the richest people on earth, had devoted their resources to improving the life of the Palestinian people. But they don't want this conflict to end. And that's something Netanyahu does not seem to understand. Understand who Netanyahu is. He's the Donald Trump of Israel. He was pushed and supported and sustained by Trump and the American right wing. He represents the far right wing, although apparently there is some amazingly even farther right wing in Israel than Netanyahu. But certainly, if Glantz is on the left, Netanyahu is on the right. You know, He, like Trump, is indicted for corruption, and he's impossible to deal with, like Trump. He is absolutely belligerent. It's quite clear that even his own people, even the Israeli people, really want a ceasefire and the hostage release. Talk about social unrest. It's not exploding here, it's exploding in Israel. And frankly, if they had an election today, and remember, in a parliamentary system, you could have elections at any time. If they had an election today, I'm confident that by a wide margin, Netanyahu barely squeaked through last time by putting together this coalition of even farther right parties. If they had an election today, I have no doubt that Netanyahu would be booted out. So, you know, Netanyahu has made Israel a pariah all around the world, something they can't afford. It's a little tiny country surrounded by, and vastly outnumbered by very hostile nations. Israel needs the moral support of the world, but it's under Netanyahu, it's fallen off the moral high ground. And that's a real tragedy for Israel. I am a very strong supporter of Israel. I always have a supporter of Netanyahu. Donald Trump wants to equate support with Israel with support for Netanyahu, even claiming you're not a good Jew if you're not supporting Netanyahu. Thank you very much about who's a good Jew and who isn't. Rabbi Donald Trump, that well-known Talmudic scholar. So it's a disaster for humanity, a disaster for the world, a disaster for Israel, a disaster for the Palestinians, and certainly bad news for the Biden Trump administration. And Biden's been trying. It's been trying as hard as he can, but short of cutting off aid to Israel, which no American president can do, he has limited leverage against someone who is as belligerent, as right wing as Netanyahu. Netanyahu said, I will not be preached to. And I'm quoting that. In other words, he doesn't listen to anyone. Doesn't matter what the Israeli people think. Doesn't matter what his allies around the world think. Doesn't matter what the United States, who is essential, whose support is essential to the survival of Israel. Doesn't matter what the people or the leadership of the United States thinks. This is not going to be resolved, until someone other than Netanyahu becomes prime minister of Israel. And of course, you have, equally worse bad actors on the other side in Hamas who are terrorists, who slaughter innocent people supposedly to make political points, who torture, who rape, who kill hostages. My God, Eisenhower was right about what an impossible situation this is, and you can never solve it militarily. For every Hamas you kill, you're going to create 5 new recruits. It just doesn't work as a military solution. Eisenhower knew that. Netanyahu does not seem to understand that at all, and he has no end game. You're not going to kill all Hamas. You're going to kill over 1 million Palestinians. What in the world are you going to do to end this conflict, which has been raging, since the 1940s and even before, when Lord Balfour, the foreign minister in England, established Palestine as a Jewish homeland? Conflicts between the Jews and the Palestinians really began over 100 years ago, and periodically breaks out, and there's been really very little relief to this relentless, impossible conflict, which no one has been able to solve, and certainly trying to navigate between Hamas and Netanyahu is a truly thankless. It would be, probably extremely important for the Keys if by some miracle the Biden administration brokered a ceasefire and a hostage release, but that seems extremely elusive at this moment. There are, a couple of other things on my mind. You want me to talk about those?
Yeah.
Yeah. The mainstream media. You've heard me blast the mainstream media for being complicit with Donald Trump. And, like the elephant, they may have not forgotten anything, but they have learned nothing. If anything, they've gotten worse. I've seen editorials in major newspapers, commentary on major broadcast outlooks saying, what we really need in this election is to compare the policies of Kamala Harris with the policies of Donald Trump. Have you learned nothing? Have you learned nothing from 9 years of Donald Trump? Donald Trump does not have policies in the traditional sense, as we saw with his double flip-flop on abortion. He doesn't care about any issue. He cares only about two things. And these two things are critical. And somehow the media is treating him like he's a normal candidate, which he isn't. And that's how authoritarianism takes hold from within, when you don't take seriously those who are clear and present dangers to a democratic system. So what are the two things that Donald Trump cares about? Number one, gaining power by any means possible. We saw what he did after 2020. He went to the courts, and that's fine. He lost in every court, every significant case. And then he tried illegally to overturn the election, inciting an insurrection, a coup designed to stop the counting of the electoral vote, sat for over 3 hours and watched the violence unfold, inflamed the violence by sending out a tweet attacking Mike Pence, who he tried to pressure to overturn the election results, tweeted that about Pence at a time when the crowd is shouting, hang Mike Pence. We also know about the slates of fake electors, the pressuring of election officials, the pressuring of state legislators, the attempt to phony up a letter from the Justice Department claiming they had found evidence of fraud. It's all right there. Donald Trump does what he does out in the open, and he says what he's going to do out in the open. Just yesterday, he said, I have every right to interfere with an election. In other words, the only legitimate election is one I win. If I lose, then I'm going to do everything possible to try to steal the election back. So that's one of the two things that Donald Trump represents, gaining and seizing power by any means possible. He is still the only losing presidential candidate in some 230 years, never to concede defeat. He hasn't conceded to this day. Even candidates with much more reason not to concede, like Al Gore, who lost by 537 votes in Florida. Gore immediately, when the Supreme Court stopped the recount, very graciously conceded. Donald Trump still hasn't. So what's the second thing Donald Trump wants to do? And he's made crystal clear what he wants to do, and that is govern as an authoritarian on the model of his buddy Viktor Orban in Hungary. And what does that mean? It means destroying your political opposition. He's already said he's going to embark on a revenge campaign if he's president. He showed, his political opponents in orange jumpsuits who had done absolutely nothing criminal. He said Barack Obama, a president who, is about as upstanding as anyone in history, should be hauled before a military tribunal, which Donald Trump controls. And as much as he wants to distance himself from Project 2025, a blueprint for a Viktor Orban type government here in the US, he can't. Over 100 former Trump staffers participated in the writing of Project 2025. He praised the Heritage Foundation who produced it. He met with the president of the Heritage Foundation. One of the key architects of Project 25, a former Trump cabinet member, said, oh yeah, secretly recorded. Yeah, Trump knew all about this, and he gave us our blessing to do it. So this is like Trump on abortion. But yeah, Trump is distancing himself just for political purposes, but he fully supports what's in there, an absolute blueprint for authoritarian government. So the mainstream media is so off base. They've got to stop treating Trump like an ordinary candidate and that this election, boils down to what tax rates you're going to do, what level you're going to support the military, the ordinary political issues. No, Donald Trump is not an ordinary candidate.
To play advocate for them for a second, the issue might be that if they don't do that, then they get thrown under the bus saying they're trying to rig the election. The media, big tech, they might, this is something I've heard pretty often from a lot of people kind of in the center who claim that both sides are dirty. They say that the media tries to influence the elections, big tech tries to influence the elections, the Democrat tries to influence the elections, even rig the elections. They just do it through more covert means than Trump does. And
Good
that
point.
if the media is constantly trashing Trump and doing this and that about him, because he is the candidate of one of the two major parties of the United States, then
So
they'll
is
get
Hitler a candidate of a
right.
major
But then
party?
they'll get thrown on the bus and say, they're trying to rig the election for Democrats.
A very good point, and it needs some analysis. Number one, that's a typical ploy of authoritarians. This kind of both sides deal. We're no different than the other side. Any sins that we have are also being committed by, and you hear that constant refrain from Trump and his supporters as untrue as it is. What do you think about the Democrats? You may think they're too liberal. You may hate their policies. You may think Kamala Harris is not going to be a good leader, but they don't pose an existential threat to our democracy. And we've never before in all our history had a candidate who does pose an existential threat. Secondly, the media is equally complicit in this both sides thing. Oh, we can't be looking too strongly on one side as opposed to the other. It's not both sides. Moreover, the media did not hesitate for 1 second to constantly, continually, viciously trash Joe Biden after the debate. Why not equal scrutiny for Donald Trump?
But you don't also think, the media has been scrutinizing Trump for 10 years now,
Not in the way they should.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we get to questions?
No, let's go to the questions.
Let's go to the questions then. I have to pull up the questions. Let's see. Remember, just some quick reminders before we get into this. Members and donations get priority. Doesn't guarantee. God damn it! Every time I hold it, the number two, the balloons fly. Members and donations get priority and questions asked. It doesn't guarantee your question is going to get asked, but they do get priority. You can follow him at Allan Lichtman. You can follow me at Sammy Licht on other
May I add
platforms.
one thing here?
Yes, go ahead.
Medium. Biden was for a week or two front page story, continuing stories, top of the news. Donald Trump says I have every right to interfere with elections, basically saying if he wins, he's going to trash our democracy. It's buried, somewhere deep inside the media. They've kind of normal. Oh, it's just Trump. Who cares? But that's exactly the way authoritarianism takes hold. When you don't take seriously what authoritarians who usually right out in the open like Trump about what they're going to do. That should not have been buried, in the media. It should have been as much of a headline as Biden stuttering in the debate.
Yeah, but don't you think that it's sort of Trump has sort of fatigued people that, he's done so many crazy things, said so many outlandish things that at this point it kind of gets buried because, again, of almost fatigue because he's just done so much crazy shit.
There's a name for this, the Gish Rush, I think it's called. You put out so much garbage that you can't sort through it. It's just, as you say, you just get tired. You can't, highlight it all. But that's exactly how internally authorians take power. People get fatigued. They get tired. They don't want to hear it. They don't think it matters. They normalize it. And we can't let that happen.
Gotcha. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I
No,
do
I'm glad you are.
I do believe that Trump is by far the biggest threat to our republic and American democracy that has ever existed. Just to be clear.
Yeah, no, but your points are well taken. and they help
Gish
explain
Gish
why there,
Gallop. Gish Gallop, is that what it's called?
yeah,
Yeah,
it helps explain why there should be a five-alarm fire and there's barely a bell ringing.
right. Member Sharon Novak says, "Do you have an exact time for your prediction yet?"
I don't have an exact time. We're shooting for Thursday or Friday. Remember, it depends on the video comes out, which I do not control. Uh, Hopefully, it'll be one of those 2 days. Should, by all circumstances, not be later than Sunday. But can you explain that it's not in my control, Sam?
It's not in his control. The New York Times has their own
Producing
beast.
this video.
Yeah, there is their own beast of an editorial system, and yeah, they have to. So you're publicly admitting you have filmed the video.
I'm not saying
You're
whether
not
I filmed
saying
it
okay,
or not.
but generally speaking, a video of that nature does take quite a time. The post production process is not as easy or as quick as you might think. Rodrigo Morales says, "Can you please provide status on the four shaky keys and where they currently lean?"
You have to wait for my final prediction for that.
There you
Because
go.
if I explain that, you'll know what my prediction is.
Good point. Yeah, I think at this point, everybody, you just gotta be patient.
You
Unless
got to be patient. You know, this is a momentous election. Our future hinges on it. You can wait another couple of days, and you will be the first to hear it. As soon as it comes out, if it's on a regular show, we'll be announcing it. If not, we'll have a special show. How many viewers do we have now?
5,123.
Nice.
Um, Member Alice Clearman, PhD, says,
Whoa.
"Does
I'm expecting a tough question.
does the we've kind of answered this question actually many times before, but does
But you
the
got to give a PhD an
exactly
opportunity.
does the internet change our perception of governance? Could the internet shift our collective knowledge about governance and then change the keys?"
Yeah, I have answered this, and I'll answer it briefly. The keys go all the way back to 1860. They're very robust. We didn't have radio even, didn't have television back then. We had limited even newspaper coverage of elections. So they've gone through much bigger changes even than the advent of the internet. And of course, my second response has always been you can't change a model on the fly. This model is based on analyses from 1860 all the way to the present.
Ian Powell Palm says, "Is there any way that the social unrest key flips at this point?"
Anything is possible.
Right. Um, if Dudley Murdoch says, "If Trump is sentenced to prison on September 18th, will there be social unrest?" Why would Trump be sentenced to prison on September 18th?
He certainly could be sentenced to prison because who knows? For a couple of hurdles that have to be cleared here. He was convicted of 34 felony counts, not of paying hush money. You know, again, the media has completely misrepresented this trial. It's not a hush money trial. What was he actually convicted of, Samuel?
In uh,
New York.
campaign fraud.
Yes, and tax fraud for misrepresenting the hush money payments as though it was an official business payment. That's fraud. It's fraud on the electorate, it's fraud on the government, and it's consistent with what he's charged with elsewhere. So he's already convicted. And the only issue supposedly was sentencing. But then the Supreme Court, Samuel, threw a big monkey wrench in this. What did the Supreme Court do? That was affected this verdict.
Said that presidents are immune from official acts, basically.
Right. And further, which most people don't realize, it also said even if you're charged with unofficial acts, you can't use evidence from official acts to establish guilt on the unofficial acts. The crazy, if giving immunity was crazy, this is even more of a stretch and more crazy. And so, of course, what do you think Donald Trump has done now?
I wasn't really listening.
Oh, that's all right. Appeal, right? That's what he always does. saying you got to throw the whole case out because it was all official acts. But certainly you got to throw out when I talked to Hope, good thing, whatever it is, this hush money thing worked out. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something incriminating. That's an official act, admitting you did something criminal when you weren't president. It's just insane, but it's the Supreme Court. They're the final word. And Judge Merchan has to adopt to that. So, number one, he has to decide whether to throw out the case entirely. And then number two, he has to decide on the sentence, which could range from probation to prison. And number three, which I think is easy, he has to decide whether to impose the sentence immediately. That I think is incredibly unlikely. He's certainly going to suspend the sentence to give Trump time to appeal, which, if Trump is really good at one thing, what's that, Sam?
Appealing.
Appealing, delaying. These cases have been dragging on forever. But it's not just Trump's fault. My good buddy was Merrick Garland, who was the victim of what maybe the worst steal in American history when Mitch McConnell hijacked his appointment. And then, because it was 8 months before the election, and then 2 weeks before the election, he confirmed Amy Coney Barrett. Merrick Garland was one of the greatest judges we've ever seen. A atrocious attorney general. He sat on his hands for a year and a half, even though we knew what Trump had done, because what Trump does is out in the open before he even appoints a special prosecutor. All of this should have taken place last year, and the trials, therefore, could have gone ahead before the election. And there's absolutely no excuse for Garland sitting on this for so long.
Thank you, Alex Mammon, for your donation.
Nice.
Nat Discord Mod says, what do you think of the German far-right victory?
It's ominous. I think I've said this before. Democracy is precious, but like all precious things, it can be destroyed, and often it's destroyed from within. Throughout the great sweep of human history, there's been precious little democracy. Most people were ruled by the divine right of monarchs or by the sword. The golden age, first golden age of democracy was after World War I, about 24 democracies. By the 1940s, that had been cut more in half. In the late 20th century, the second golden age of democracy. But now in the 21st century, democracy is declining all over the world. Fewer than 10% of the world's people live in fully functioning democracies. And right-wing politics is spreading. You can see it in Israel. You see it here with Donald Trump. You saw it in France with the rise of a far-right movement. And now we're seeing it for the first time in a local election in Germany. We see it in Hungary. It's very, very ominous.
Do you see any future scenario where the keys might trip up one day? Maybe if the two-party system is replaced with a multi-party system, or one of the parties fully dies, or if RCV is implemented. What's RCV? Ranked choice voting. Yeah.
Ranked choice voting. Yes. I couldn't spit it out. Absolutely. Look, the keys are based on history. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not Mike Johnson. The Almighty speaks to him, right?
Right.
It's based on history, can change. His keys are very robust. They go all the way back to 1860. But of course, things could be changed so cataclysmically that it could change the keys. I'm not so arrogant to say, the keys last forever. What's that old song? Nothing lasts forever but the earth and the sky. And even the earth and the sky is not going to last forever.
Wow, we just got a $300 donation.
They must have liked my
from I guess so.
Thank you.
From Laszlo P. Newman. They say, it seems a sticking point with protesters for Gaza against Biden is specifically over his providing what looks like to the protesters a degree of weapons, further enabling Netanyahu's carnage. Do you have a sense of how to explain to protesters in a way that they'll understand that Biden isn't doing what they think he is?
Yeah. First of all, Biden, as I've said, is not the prime minister of Israel. He does not make policy for Israel. He can try to leverage, but he and Netanyahu, are on opposite ends of the political spectrum and certainly personally not exactly the best of friends. So Biden's hands are very much tied here. Plus, he cannot stop providing aid to Israel. That's just not a viable option. The only viable option would be to somehow, and I'm not optimistic, make Netanyahu see the light. More realistic is for Netanyahu to be booted out, and I think he would be as soon as they have elections and a more reasonable prime minister take over.
But why isn't that a viable option to stop giving aid to Israel?
Well, first of all, the vast majority of the American people are against it. Secondly, that would put Israel in an impossible position. Remember, the much larger states around Israel, like Iran, have promised to wipe out all the Jews of Israel. You can't just leave them defenseless.
Right. Um, Brandon Kalea says, Dr. L, which improves Harris's victory chance the most? A Gaza deal, decrease in unemployment, or Donald Trump's sentencing?
Gaza deal,
There you go.
no question. Remember, the point of the keys is it's governing, not campaigning, that counts.
Right. Miles Wolf says, curious about your work ethic. How many hours per day do you spend doing work of any kind?
You can answer that, Sam.
All the time, constantly. But you do remove yourself at times to, spend
I
time with
do.
family, work out, but it's basically 24/7.
Right. I do work out and I do spend time with my family, absolutely, but it's pretty much what I do.
Yeah, you don't really watch TV. Well, you watch sports, but
I watch sports too,
yeah.
absolutely. And
Um,
teams are not doing well.
but often you watch sports while you're working too.
That is correct.
Yeah.
I am very good at multitasking.
Member Jesse Boone says, when it was inflation inevitable for the economy to recover from the pandemic?
Absolutely. I'm not an economist, but I'm not going to quote Jack Germond again. You've
No
heard
more
that.
Jack Germán quotes.
No more Jack Germond quotes about economists disagreeing with each other, but it was a worldwide phenomenon that inevitably arose out of the disruption of supply chains resulting from the pandemic. It was not anything, unique to policies of the Biden administration.
Kevin W. says, with the report of the recently killed hostages, does this officially turn the foreign failure key certainly false now?
Got to wait to my prediction. I'm not going to, turn the keys now.
There you go. Be patient. Dad, go like this. Patience.
Patience. Be
Patience.
zen. Be zen.
Yes. Serenity now.
Oh,
Um,
no.
Remember Barry Smith says RFK Jr. is having trouble removing himself from some of the state ballots. Which candidate can it help/hurt?
All right. I've said this before, but I'm going to reiterate it for emphasis. Anyone who thinks they know what's happening with the so-called RFK Jr. vote, I'd be happy to sell you a big bridge for my hometown of Brooklyn. They don't know. Here's the thing. Remember, Sam, the Lichtman wasted vote syndrome. Do you know what that is?
The Lichtman wasted vote syndrome.
When it
That
comes to third-party candidates.
yes, in polls, people say, yeah, I like this third party candidate, but in reality, they're not going to actually go to the ballot box and vote for them.
Exactly. Inevitably, third party or independent candidates actually poll in terms of voting as opposed to surveys at about half of their survey level. So RFK Jr. has been about 4 or 5%. That means his real strength is 2%. And some of them might go to Trump, some of them might go to uh, Harris, and some of them won't vote. Some of them might vote for Jill Stein or Cornel West or whatever, but there's no way to know with such minimal numbers who benefits or who doesn't. Plus, now, it was the most convoluted withdrawal I've ever heard. I'm going to stay on the ballot in red states and blue states where it doesn't matter, but I'll get off the ballot in swing states so you could vote for Trump. But now in 4 swing states, as the uh, viewer points out, he can't get off the ballot. So that further dilutes any, benefit that either Trump or Harris might receive from RFK Jr. The guy has a way inflated sense of himself.
Right. Starling Reese says, do a survey to see how many people have read your book. A poll, I
Go
guess
ahead.
he means. You want it? Which book? Keys to the White House, or any
Yeah,
or any book of yours?
any book of mine.
All right, let's do a poll. Have you read an Allan Lichtman book? Right? Yes or no?
Yeah. How many viewers do we have?
5,700.
Oh, so we've got a good sample,
Yes.
maybe not a random sample.
No, not a random sample. Next question is from Ben Valverde Lendertz. They say, if Trump is in office again, would all his extremist proposals really take place? Would the U.S. no longer be safe to live?
Well, I can't say whether you'd be safe to live or not. That's too extreme. But I can say if Trump wins, take him seriously. A lot of what he proposes, he's going to put into effect. And he has nothing to lose. He's immune. You can't do anything to him. You can't impeach him because you could impeach him if Democrats took the House, but he'll never get convicted in the Senate when you need 67 votes. And he's immune from any official act. He can do whatever he wants. So there's no question in my mind that a number of things would follow. The persecution of his political enemies, the end of the independence of the federal civil service. It'll be under Donald Trump's thumb. The end of reproductive rights for women in America. The end of a free press. Uh, Substantial rollbacks of civil rights and protections for transgender and LGBTQ persons. Uh, I think these are some of the things that could happen. By the way, I just remembered I didn't answer the question. I guess it was a multi-part question. Will there be a civil war or social unrest if Trump is sentenced to prison? Absolutely not. Trump called when he was on trial, called on his followers, you know, to swarm the courthouse, demonstrate your support for me. And what actually happened in the streets, Sam?
Jack Diddley.
Right. No one showed up. Even his wife didn't show up. And I don't think his daughter Ivanka even showed up. So it's a lot of bluster.
And Ben Valerde Lendertz, you do have permission. Sharon Novak says, will this lack of ceasefire hurt Harris enough to go against her and towards Trump?
Well, the lack of a ceasefire is definitely a problem, but it's more the other way around. That is, I don't think there's a lot of blame for the lack of a ceasefire, as people understand how tough that is, but it certainly would be a benefit, maybe a great benefit. Again, I don't like to talk hypotheticals because the devil is always in the details, but as a general proposition, it certainly would be beneficial for the Biden administration and for the world, for the people of Israel, the people of Gaza, people around the world to have a ceasefire in this horrific war and get at least the surviving hostages, however many there are, released.
Daniel Castellano says, re the short-term economy key. How is 2024 different than 1992 when people perceived the economy to be in recession despite about 14 months of growth?
I don't know what you're referring to. 1990. Oh, 19. Yeah, there's a big difference. The National Bureau of Economic Research declared that the country was in the grip of recession. And I guess maybe you haven't read my book, but I hope you do. I make very clear in the book it wasn't until a couple of months after the election that the National Bureau of Research said, oops, the recession's actually over. Before the election. Again, I don't like to talk hypothetical, but it could have changed that key and changed the outcome of the election.
Um,
I don't know why my brain flipped to 1892. I was thinking of the Great Depression of the 1890s.
I see. Me too. Um,
Everyone's thinking about that.
right.
Yeah.
Still Alive says many people think that Netanyahu may be deliberately trying to start something in the Middle East just to try to hurt Biden and Kamala because he really wants Trump in power. Do you see this happening?
Well, I can't crawl into his head, but no question he wants to see Trump in power. You know, his politics are aligned with Trump's and very much clashes with Biden's. But I'm not sure that's the primary motivation behind Netanyahu. I think he really believes that he's the strong leader. He's the great military commander who's going to once and for all get rid of Hamas. Again, I'm just speculating. But I think that's the primary motive. But certainly he would vastly prefer to see Trump over Biden as the next U.S. president. They're much more in sync.
Soccer Guy 325 says, "Hi, Alan. Why did Storm Thurmond and George Wallace take votes away from Democrats when their ideologies were so much more aligned with Republicans?"
Well, they're both Democrats. And again, I'm not sure who they took votes from, but third parties always count against the White House party. Remember, I don't try to parse out the votes for third party candidates. It's impossible. First of all, as I said, polls way inflate their numbers, and it's impossible to know if you pulled them out, and created a hole in history, where their votes would go. Anyone who thinks they know that, again, see me about my bridge.
Um, Everybody says the bridge thing. Enough with the bridge thing.
All right,
Everybody
I'm
on
done with
CNN is like, I got a bridge, Brooklyn Bridge. Enough with the bridge.
But of course, I'm genuinely from the Brooklyn
That's
Bridge.
true. You can actually say it.
Yeah.
Um,
How's our poll doing?
oh, right, our poll. Wow, I'm shocked. Wow.
No one's read my book, huh?
No one's read your books.
Oh, no.
81% say they haven't read any of your books.
Oh,
What the heck, guys?
they better get on the ball here.
You better get on the ball
I
here.
have 13 books you can read.
Seriously, yeah, you just gotta pick one.
Oh, I've got good news.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The latest book, The Truth About Conservatives, It's Not What You Think, just got unanimously approved by the governing board of the University of Notre Dame Press. Very interesting place and a great place to publish that book. One of my former students, one of my great students, Steve Rinn, is director of the press, but he has nothing to do with what the board says. But unanimously, the board has accepted publication. It'll be out next year. For those 81% who haven't read one of my books, here's another one you cannot read.
I'm kind of shocked. Well,
Yeah, me too.
member J.
People don't read anymore.
Yeah, people don't read. Member JGP says, I have proudly read 5 of your 13 books. So some people have read multiple books too. So
Yeah, we should count them, give them many votes in the poll.
there you go.
How many responded?
Let's see. 1,500 people.
Oh, that's a pretty hefty sample.
I'm pretty
I'm
shocked, but
presuming all the people who didn't respond have read one of my books.
right. That's what we'll assume. Unfortunately, it's probably the opposite. Probably people are too embarrassed to click no, so they're just not voting. Actress Druid says, "What are your thoughts on Special Counsel Jack Smith's filed brief with the U.S. Supreme Court of Appeals as an attempt to revive the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case against Trump?"
Well, I think his appeal is to the 11th Circuit right now, not to the Supreme Court, although it could certainly go to the Supreme Court if they decide to take the case, no matter how the 11th Circuit rules. What's happened, for those who are not aware, this was the most open and shut of all the cases. We know all the facts. He said he took the documents. He admitted to that. He said they're his. He admitted he didn't return them, said they were his. We know even after the subpoena, they found over 100 documents in his possession, didn't return them even when subpoenaed. He moved the boxes around to conceal them from federal officials. This is just what's publicly known, much like counsel knows, an absolute open and shut case. And the law is not ambiguous. And, it was all done after his presidency. So there's no question of presidential immunity, though I'm sure Trump will raise that as his next appeal. But this Judge Cannon, who got brutally shot down by Trump appointees on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, has violated all past precedent and said the special counsel was illegally appointed, so the whole case is thrown out. And of course, Jack Smith has appealed to the 11th Circuit. I think ultimately he will win, although who knows what the Supreme Court might do if it gets there. But again, what Donald Trump is really good at is delaying. This case should have been tried a long time ago, but now with all these appeals, clearly zero chance it's going to be tried before the election. Doesn't look like any of the other cases are going to be tried before the election, courtesy of Judge Cannon and courtesy of the Supreme Court's immunity decision. As I said, if the Supreme Court decision had been in effect in the 1970s, Richard Nixon would have gotten away with Watergate because it was all official actions, and our democracy may have died 50 years ago.
Ben Weinberg says Trump is threatening to shut down the government if a bill to prevent non-citizens from voting, which is already illegal, doesn't pass the House. Would this affect the short-term economy key if the government shuts down?
Well, Trump can't shut down the government.
Well, I guess he would pressure his allies in the government to shut it down.
Yeah, whether they would listen to him or not with an election, with all these guys coming up and women coming up for election, who knows? I doubt it. But you're absolutely right. Republicans have created a red herring issue. And I'm very familiar with this because I've been in a lot of civil rights cases involving Hispanics, who are the targets of these so-called non-citizen voting. It's a complete red herring. There is almost no non-citizen voting. This has been tested time and time again. It's absolutely inconsequential. Never has it had any effect on the election. And yet Republicans are making a big deal of that. Even in Texas, Attorney General Paxton, who is himself under indictment, who was impeached by his own party, organized these raids of Hispanic communities, which were very traumatic for the communities, but netted nothing in terms of illegal voting. It is already illegal to vote as a non-citizen. And if you're a non-citizen, are you going to risk years in prison to cast a single vote? Of course not. There may be a few mistakes, amounting to such a small percentage that you can't even calculate it.
Lopez7 says, will the uncommitted movement voters hurt Harris in swing states?
It doesn't seem big enough to have an impact on this election. So I don't see it as anything more than a very minor blip.
How can Harris win by a landslide? What would that look like? Majority of the electoral vote? Thank you for all you do.
Well, she needs a majority of electoral votes. The way the Constitution works is to win the presidency, you have to win an outright majority, not a plurality of electoral votes. So that doesn't constitute a landslide. What would constitute a landslide would be if she wins by, say, 10 points or more in the popular vote and amasses, say, 350 or more electoral college votes. Not impossible, but that would mean winning places like Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and maybe even some surprise red state.
Fa Fa Fo Fo Both, that's their
Good
name.
work, Sam.
Fa Fa Fo Fo Both says, please discuss the Taylor Swift effect on the election, whether her endorsement will be a lock for Kamala.
I've studied elections since the founding. I wrote the book, The Embattled Vote in America from the Founding to the Present. The most overblown thing in elections are endorsements. There is no evidence that endorsements have a significant effect on an election. But maybe, again, unprecedented things can happen. Maybe Taylor Swift, and Sam could speak to this better than me, being a media maven. Maybe Taylor Swift is something unique in the history of the country. I don't know. What do you think, Sam?
I don't think so. I think probably her her fan base probably leans a little bit Kamala, but there's probably plenty of conservative women that listen to her music. So
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
doesn't mean any of them are going to be influenced by what she says.
Right. Um, why doesn't gerrymandering make House results any less reliable an indicator of overall state sentiment? Re key one.
Well, gerrymandering is definitely an issue, but remember, it's comparative. It compares uh, the prior midterm to the current midterm. So, presuming there's not a huge change in gerrymandering, which there generally isn't, the shift is much more reliable than uh, a cross-sectional benchmark.
Um, James LaGruta says, Professor, would you be open to discussing a keys to the governor's mansion?
I tried that once, many, many years ago. I tried the Senate and governors. Very difficult to develop one set of questions, one set of keys for 50 separate gubernatorial and Senate elections. I actually developed back in the 90s, I think, or even the late 80s, I don't remember exactly, keys to the Senate. And I was about 85 to 90% right. But what do you think everyone focused on, Sam?
The stuff you got wrong.
Stuff I got wrong, so I decided forget it. And I never could come up with keys to the governorships, just too hard.
Oh, Kiko's freaking out. 1 second. Hold on. Okay, okay. Sorry about that. Do you think Netanyahu is at least partially to blame for the hostages' killings for refusing a peace deal?
There is so much blame to go around in the Middle East. Certainly, as you heard, I'm no fan of Netanyahu. There are grievances on both sides that go back 100 years and more. That's one of the reasons it's so difficult to solve the problem. It's not that all the good on one side and all the evil is on the other side. Each side has, real grievances, and they're not going to be settled and resolved militarily.
Isaiah Mercado says, can you do a standalone video explaining your idea of the political industrial complex and elaborate why you believe campaigning doesn't matter?
That is a great idea,
Good
and I
idea.
think we'll definitely consider doing that.
For
Probably, maybe even after the election, because
maybe,
there's some election stuff.
maybe even.
Maybe, but
Formetta,
that's a
what?
great idea.
Formetta, what says Trump is behind tampering talks of a ceasefire deal with Netanyahu to compromise Biden's talks. What should we do?
I've heard that. I am unaware that it's been verified, and I don't want to throw out accusations like that unless it's verified. But it has happened once before. Do you know when it happened before, Sam? And who was responsible?
When what happened before?
Presidential candidate
Oh,
interfering with the peace
yes,
deal.
Nixon in Vietnam.
Nixon in Vietnam. We know it happened because Lyndon Johnson had tapped Nixon's phone and knew Nixon had sent Madame New, uh, an envoy to the South Vietnamese saying, don't reach a peace deal. Wait till I'm elected and I'll get you a better deal. Lyndon Johnson called it treason, and I don't think he was wrong. We were at war,
Right.
uh, but he didn't want to, throw a monkey wrench into the system by revealing it. So such a horrific act is not without precedent. And of course, Nixon had no plan to end the war. The war extended for the 5 years with thousands of American casualties. Uh, who knows how many, maybe hundreds of thousands of Asian casualties.
Janet Major says, just like Trump fatigue, couldn't we say that the American people have Israel Palestine fatigue after decades of no win? And Americans are just not going to rise up and protest en masse, turning the social unrest key?
I think that's a very, I hadn't thought about that, but I do think there is, understandably, you know, a lot of fatigue about an issue that's been smoldering without being doused for over 100 years.
Tulak Horde and the occult orchestra Gen Sec asks, what's the difference between far right and conservative?
Uh, those are not exactly precise terms. Uh, Far right means you're even more extreme than a mainstream conservative, more inclined, for example, to support white Christian nationalism than a mainstream conservative. But these are not, precisely defined terms. How are we doing on our poll? Did we find any more readers?
I have bad news, it's gone down. Eight,
Oh no.
83% now say with 2,162 votes they haven't read your book. Well, here's a perfect opportunity. Go to Amazon, go to Allan Lichtman, the author, and pick one of his books to read. How about that, Dad?
Got lots to choose from.
There you go. Should I just end this poll to put you out of your misery?
Yeah, get rid of this
Okay.
poll. I'm sorry we started it, but it's pretty revealing.
It's quite revealing, yeah. Um,
Nobody reads anymore.
Nobody reads anymore. That's why. So actually, interestingly, that's part of the reason why I pushed my dad to start this show. I used to say to you, "You're spending all this time and energy on books, which is admirable, and I do think adds to your legacy." But nobody. I said to you, I was like, "You got to get
You
yourself
did tell
out."
me that.
I said, "You got to get yourself out on digital media," and that's what we're doing here.
Have we hit 100,000 subscribers yet?
Let me check. That's a good question.
We were very close.
We're so damn close. Let me see where we're at right at this moment. We are at 97,845. So
Wow.
we are.
Subscribe.
If
Put us
you're
over the top.
if you're watching and you're not subscribed, please subscribe and invite other people to subscribe. We also have a Reddit. We have a community in a Reddit Discord and no a Reddit and a Discord, which you can find the links to join in the description of this video. You ready for your next question, Dad?
I'm always ready.
Randy Kincaid says, why is it so hard to get on the ballot for any elected office in Ohio? I am not wealthy and want to run for office. We need people representing us like myself, who is an average, lower to middle class American.
Believe it or not, it used to be much harder. The very first case I ever did as an expert witness was back in 1980, Anderson versus Celebrezzi, Secretary of State in Ohio. You know who John Anderson was, Sam?
No.
He was an independent candidate in 1980, trying to get on the ballot. And the barriers were absolutely impossible. You couldn't do it. And we won our Supreme Court case, which made it easier. But there are still, in some states like Ohio, some pretty steep barriers for the simple reason that the political establishment doesn't want you running as an independent, do they?
No.
No, it's pure
Um,
power politics. Imagine that.
Casey Adams says, "What advice do you give students interested in a career in political history and analysis?"
Oh, don't do what I did. I didn't switch to a history major till my senior year in college. I missed out on a lot. So start out as a history major, try to get an internship dealing with historical topics, get into research seminars where you're actually writing historical papers. And then, if you want to be a professor, it's a very difficult path. You have to get a PhD, a master's. Well, if you want to teach, community college, you can with a master's. But if you want to teach 4-year college or university, unfortunately, you have to have a PhD, which can take as long as 6 to 8 years. You can do it quicker. I think I did it in 5, but uh, it takes a long time, and there's no guarantee you'll get a job even after you get your PhD. So it takes a lot of dedication to yourself, the better off you are. But
Pat,
once you become a professor, it's the greatest job in the world.
there you
No
go.
better job.
Patrick Murray says, "This is more of a philosophical question, but I'd like to hear it from a historian. Has America's collective consciousness changed over time?"
Oh, of course, it constantly changes. You know, there was a time when Americans did not believe women should be voting or African Americans voting,
We had
or
slaves.
about to say, or the vast majority, even in the free, you count the free states and the slave states, the vast majority of Americans were not against slavery. Even Abraham Lincoln did not initially campaign to abolish slavery. His initial position was to prevent the expansion of slavery because he knew abolition was not a winning issue at that time in the United States. So, of course, our consciousness has greatly changed over time, or even more recently, issues like gay marriage. You know, 30 years ago, who would have thought that the Supreme Court would legalize gay marriage? So things, in fact, do change.
What are your thoughts on Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery?
I have a little bit of experience with that, and I knew full well it is illegal to go into Area 60 and take photographs for political purposes. Trump was warned, of course, he denies it, but you can't believe what he says, was warned that what he was doing was illegal. Apparently, they pushed aside a poor, an innocent employee was just doing their job trying to keep them away for political purposes. And this is nothing new for Trump. This is a guy who, according to General Kelly, backed up by the Military Times, called those buried in European cemeteries suckers and losers, who called John McCain, a great war hero, a loser because he doesn't like people who are captured, who denigrated the highest military honor, the Congressional Medal of Honor, who attacked the Gold Star couple who was speaking in 2016 at the Democratic Convention. So it's not as if this is some isolated incident.
Good point, Dad. Marshall Ritter says, last
Getting
week.
late here.
Oh, right. I didn't. Yeah. All right.
3 more questions?
We have so many questions. Yeah.
All right, 5 more questions.
Let's try to do. How about we try to do rapid fire?
I'll try, but I'm not necessarily going to do that, but I'll try.
All right.
I'm a professor. I'm used to speaking for 2.5 hours.
I know, sir. Marshall Ritter says, last week you talked about how 2000 and 2016 were the hardest elections to make a prediction call. So I'd like to ask what elections were the easiest to make the call.
2008. I called 2008 in 2006, and I said at the time, notoriously, things are going so badly for the second Bush term already that the Democrats could nominate a name out of the phone book in 2008 and still win back the presidency. And that's kind of what they did, right? Who ever heard of Barack Obama?
Pierre Holmes says, Eisenhower lost a major policy change key in 1956. That was the only key that he lost out of the 13. Why did he lose that key? Do you remember?
because it was Eisenhower and Eisenhower. It's tough to win that key when you're succeeding yourself. It can happen, but it's hard.
What do you think of the math that shows the impossibility of a democracy, such as Arrow's impossibility theorem and Gibbard Satherwadi theorem? Jesus Christ.
I am familiar with all those, but they're way too complicated to talk about now, and I
Right.
don't agree with them. I think, at least to this point, we've had a pretty darn good functioning democracy, despite the paradoxes of voting.
What is your feeling with this supposed October surprise from Netanyahu?
I'm not sure what he could do that would be even more surprising. I guess the one surprising thing he could do, which he doesn't want to do because would help Harris, would be to finally give in on a ceasefire and a hostage release.
Lazar Lecherzar Vanchev says this show is great and the dog barking makes it more genuine. Okay, thank you, Kiko. They said I think Trump's assassination attempt was really weird. Can you comment?
I can't. I'm not a forensic expert. I thought it was very weird.
Right.
And I thought a lot of what Trump was doing was for show, but you're beyond my expertise there.
All right, this will be the last question of the night, but here's the good news. If you want to keep chatting, I have an after show, Lichtman Live post show on my channel. The link to that is linked in the description of this video. There's 5,500 people watching. I expect at least 2,500 people on my post show, Dad.
And before you leave to go on Sam's post show,
Yes.
be sure to subscribe so we go over 100,000, donate,
Yes.
and join.
Right. Um, Last question of the night from Assassin Creed guy. Is it
That's
possible?
scary.
That's a video game series called Assassin's
Oh,
Creed,
okay.
but is it possible to alter the keys for foreign nations such as Canada?
I've been asked this for 40 years, and my answer is you can't just take the keys and export them to the country, but you can use the method. And anyone who is familiar with the method and who knows a lot about the history and politics of another country could certainly, although it pretty much applies to a two-party system. Not impossible to apply it to a multi-party system, but the mathematics get really tough.
All right, there we go. I just put the link to the post show in the chat. Apologize if we didn't get to your question. Again, we get so many questions now, we can't get to all of them.
And we've gone over time.
Yes, but remember, you can join our Discord. You can join the 13 Keys subreddit. A lot of your questions can be answered there by people there, joining the community there. Don't forget, if you're a member, if we're not gleaning from the chat anymore, I now put a community tab post before the show where members should put their questions. Any final words to the people out there, Dad?
Yes, pray for the people in Israel and Gaza. It is a great humanitarian tragedy. We only hope we could somehow find a way to stop the violence. I've learned over time, violence only perpetuates more violence.
Good night.
Good night.